Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Dear listener, how are you? Here in the UK it's beginning to get quite cold and definitely starting to feel like mid-November. It's been a busy time for the podcast recently. I guested on Paul Bestall's Mysteries and Monsters podcast, a great show which I highly recommend, and I was also thrilled to be invited onto Yvette Fielding's Paranormal Activity podcast. Yvette is a hero for many of us fans, since she hosted the early 2000s TV show Most Haunted. In the coming weeks and months, we have some very exciting guests, including Paul Devereaux and his wife Charla, who discuss their own fairy encounter, and we'll speak with otherworldly artist Brett Manning about her extraordinary experiences and how they have inspired her vivid creations. As always, I thank my dear curious crew on Patreon, without whom this podcast would not be here. Also, a warm welcome to Cheryl Caifes, Lisa Payne and Genevieve, who have just joined on the Weird Folk of the Woods tier. If you'd like to join us and support the show, we're at patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. Now, if you're anything like me and you recognise a fellow experiencer when you meet one, this episode will entirely resonate with you. Our guest is one of those people who have had numerous experiences over the years, since childhood. Perhaps you're thinking, yes, me too. Well, there are many of us, and interestingly, there are certain aspects of similarity to the types of phenomena children remember experiencing, particularly from between the ages of 3 and 4. If you're into objective experiences, then you'll be interested in our guest's description of a multiple witness sighting that took place in a British wood while he was out walking with a friend. And if you enjoy the pure magic of this strange universe, well, just wait until you hear the story of the haunted fairy painting. We also hear of a strange encounter that took place on Glastonbury Tor, and we discuss lucid dreaming. This episode is such a treasure box, a gift for you. And there's more. In a bonus Patreon episode, our guest describes a rather unnerving event at West Kennet Longbarrow, the scene of many strange accounts over the years. I hope you enjoyed this chat as much as I did. I'll see you at the end for a catch-up. Time to
What I'm going to start off with telling you about indicates why in my particular family, like a lot of families, there's always been a psychic influence. There's always been an awareness of what we call the other world, or supernatural things, or paranormal things. This is all anecdotal evidence, but it comes from my family, who I had no reason to disbelieve them. And it involves my mother, many years ago, when she was a little girl herself. She must have been about 3.5 years old. And this obviously was before the Second World War. And her mother and father and herself had moved into a new rented house in London. And somehow there was this painting that was a family heirloom. And the person that originally had the painting that was been stored in their loft for a number of years had passed away. And my mother's father had been left this particular painting as an heirloom. So he went to see the painting, and apparently it was a beautiful watercolour painting of fairies in a sort of woodland scene with sort of, muted earth colours in the background. But the unique thing about it was that the fairies were depicted in very vivid colours. And apparently they were very charming to look at. They looked very fae-like, not quite human, but human enough.
Mhm.
And some of the characters in it were playing a flute. They were laughing and dancing, and sort of generally little folk making merry. So one night, my mother's father brought this painting home, and he showed it to my mother, who was very excited and charmed by it. And they put her up to bed and put the painting up on the mantelpiece. And in those days, they just had her only light in the room was a little like night light, a little like a little oil lamp that she had on the mantelpiece. And so, her father spent some time telling her a bedtime story as normal, and she was getting settled down for bed. And her mother and father went downstairs to have the evening meal while she settled down. And she recounted that she was there for a while, and she hoped she was still wide awake, and she was just looking round the room. So she was sort of turning away from the mantelpiece and the painting and the little light, and she was just looking at the little flickering light in the rest of the room. When all of a sudden she noticed that she could see some little coloured lights reflecting into the room as well, and she was puzzled by that, and she was looking round. Then she looked back at the painting, and then she suddenly realised it seemed a little bit different in some way, something a bit odd, and she couldn't work out what was different about it to start with. And so she was looking at it. Then all of a sudden she realised that 3 of the fairies that were painted in the foreground were now no longer in the painting, as if they'd left the painting. So she looked round the room and she saw them. They'd come out of the painting, and they were sitting literally on the end of her bed in vivid colours looking at her. She looked back to the painting, and as she looked at the painting, the rest of the fairies in the painting seemed to peel themselves off of the painting, become 3D in vivid colours, and begin to dance along the mantelpiece and dance around the room. And she watched this for probably only a short period of time before she suddenly realised, hang on, this shouldn't be happening. This isn't normal. I shouldn't see this. And so she freaked out, and she screamed for her mum and dad, who came running all the way upstairs into her room. But the instant she opened the door, or rather her mother opened the door, I should say, it all stopped. The fairies are back in the painting. There was nothing to be seen. She was obviously very upset. Mother and father thought she was just having a bad dream or something. They calmed her down, reassured her. She went back to sleep. Not a problem. Next night, she slept all right. Nothing happened with the painting. On the third night, the same thing happened again. Fairies came out of the painting, danced around the room, laughing and giggling. She screamed. Parents came up, calmed her down. And then it happened again, and then another occasion, and another occasion. At this point, Mum and Dad were getting a bit worried about what was going on with their daughter. Maybe the painting was scary in some way. They shouldn't have brought it into the house. And on this one particular night, she screams for her dad. So her dad says, I'll go. So he goes running upstairs, goes into the room, and to his absolute shock, he saw the fairies. Oh. They were in the room, flying around the room, and he just screamed like you wouldn't believe it. So his wife came running upstairs to see what was wrong. And when she got there, the fairies had gone back into the painting, and he was so shaken up. They had to sit him down, give him brandy. He wanted to talk to a priest. He was absolutely terrified. So after that, they decided to wrap the painting up and put it in the attic. The story obviously came out to the relatives related to the deceased relative. I'm not sure of their details. And then somebody said, yeah, well, that's why the painting was in the attic, because that used to happen when we had it.
Wow. Where is that painting?
Unfortunately, my grandmother took it out into the garden when she found that out, burned it.
Oh dear.
I've heard of haunted paintings before, but I've got no reason to disbelieve my own family.
Yeah.
This one, and I swear to you, from what I can remember from elderly relatives, the look of sheer naked fear on their faces and disinclination to talk about the story that something had happened, and it seemed to terrorise them. Although there was nothing frightening actually in the occurrence itself.
No.
But yeah.
Just
So,
magic. That's what a wonderful story, and how amazing that was in your family as well. So what did your mum make of it as she got older? Was she able to talk about it?
yeah, she would talk about it. She was quite all right because she was one of those people that you call a natural psychic. Um, she'd already apparently terrorized her own father because after this event with the fairies, she was shouting for her dad again one night. This was after they'd burnt the painting and all that sort of thing. So they
Mm.
thought that situation had been dealt with. And again, as I said, she was about 3.5 years old, so she was only little. And her father went up to her room and he heard her shouting, "I'm not comfortable. I feel like a pudding in a sack." So he went into the room and he said to her, "What's the matter?" And she sat on her bed, looked at him, and he opened his arms. He was going to walk across to her to pick her up. And before he could take any steps into the room, she levitated straight up the bed and flew straight into his arms.
Wow.
And so she was naturally very psychic, so she could talk about
Yeah.
things like that. So that was good for me because I from an early age see things. I wasn't prone to hallucinations or anything like that, but I could sort of tell what was a weird psychic experience and what was imagination. So for me, that was really good. But my mother did healing work. She used it for healing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting about the levitation, because I think that actually happens a lot more than we realize. I think that this is something, particularly around that age, I recognize this. And I think this happens a lot, and I think kids have maybe not all kids, I don't know, but I definitely know that there are quite a number of children that naturally levitate.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, as bizarre as it's going to sound, I've seen little instances of that myself where it happens. And
Yeah.
even though I know that can happen, sometimes you still think, did I just see that? Did that just happen? And
Yeah.
it's the same thing like with what we call the genuine crop circles. I had an encounter with a genuine crop circle and a friend of mine years ago. And we went to explore this crop circle that appeared overnight. And we decided to enter the big circle in the formation from opposite sides. And I remember seeing my friend he was a couple of steps ahead of me, went to step into the circle, and I saw him lift about 6 inches up into the air. And I thought, and then he came down again with a really shocked look on his face. And I thought, how did he do that? That was clever. So I stepped into the circle and suddenly found myself bobbing 6 inches up into the air and coming down again. So things like that can happen.
Do you think that's to do with, these are highly magnetized places after these, you think it's to do with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think with that I wouldn't have said that was psychic energy. Children levitating and floating is certainly their own psychic energy.
Definitely.
Their own aura.
Yeah. Because they can, very easily will themselves higher, all of that kind of thing. So with the painting, was there any comeback? I mean, burning the fairy painting, was life okay for them after that? Because I would worry that there would be some kind of response to that.
There was.
And you don't have to talk if there's something that is difficult. You don't need to.
No, it's not difficult. My grandmother, originally was she was Spanish, and that's another story I'll tell you another time. But she was very much into magic, and she was involved with a lot of the infamous magicians of the day. And then she decided at some point that all of that was probably evil, and she joined a church. Sort of out of superstitious fear. She didn't really go to church regularly and whatever, but after that burning the painting, there was odd, weird, almost like poltergeist things happening in the house. And she went into the front room one sunny morning, the back room, I should say, and it had double French doors that you could see through because they were glass and large glass windows. And she was looking out into the garden when she she suddenly realised there was a figure in the garden. And she thought, well, that's odd. Who's that? Somebody with long hair who was standing with their back to her. So she went up and looked, and the figure turned round and she swore it was Jesus. She was absolutely terrified.
Mm.
And he was sort of hovering about 6 inches over the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And this figure was standing looking at her with these intense eyes that in her mind looked exactly like Jesus. And this lasted for about 2 or 3 minutes before the figure suddenly vanished. And she was absolutely terrified.
Healing has helped me many times in my life when I'd reached a point where something needed to change. In 2005, I trained with Martin Brofman to learn the body mirror system of healing, which was life-changing for me. It's based on the idea that the parts of your body that don't work well reflect the parts of your life that don't work well, and about which you have tension in your consciousness. The understanding is that tension is stress, and stress causes symptoms. In a distance healing or in-person session, I move up the chakras, returning each one to wholeness using a colour map. During the process, I see images and situations, I hear words or receive impressions that tell me something about what caused the tension in that person's life. The feedback at the end of the session is a really big part of the healing. If you're interested in a chakra healing session, you can contact me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com. Did you get a bad feeling from it then? I wonder if it was some kind of angelic, if it wasn't, a vision of Jesus or...
I don't think she got a bad feeling from it, but she got a huge superstitious fright suddenly seeing the person she took to be Jesus materializing in the garden.
Yeah.
And other weird things would happen around mirrors in the house. People would go look in a mirror and then they thought they saw like a misty, out of focus face looking over their shoulder. They'd look round startled, thinking somebody was standing behind them, and they wasn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, that's very creepy, isn't it?
Mm.
Well, I'm glad, but your mum didn't get any comeback from,
No, she didn't.
No, that's good, because it wasn't her decision, was it, to do that?
No.
People are only doing these acts out of love as well, aren't they? Because obviously she was thinking about protecting her family, so we could all kind of put our heads in our hands. But what would we do if we were in that situation? You say you'd do one thing, but actually, if you were in that situation, you might do a very different thing. So, you can totally understand why she took the decision to do that.
Also, although it was apparently charming and magical, it was kind of unwarranted. There was no sense of control over it, and if it was disturbing your child so much,
yeah,
and as well as your husband,
exactly.
you think, well, we need to show them that it's all right, it's gone now.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? This is what we like to do. It's don't worry, it was just a dream, dear. Don't worry, it's gone now. It won't. We always, understandably, I've done it myself. We would soothe our children, our family members, to sort of say, no, don't worry, that everything is as it should be. There's nothing weird to see. Yeah, yeah. So you've had lots of experiences yourself as well. So obviously, and I feel this is these abilities, this openness, it runs in families. I feel that myself. And it seems to bear out that way with yourself as well, because as I say, you've had quite a number of experiences too.
Yes. 80, I can't remember, to be honest with you, whether it was 89 or very early 90s. But what I do remember is, although this isn't apparently related to this, I do remember it was the height of like the crop circle phenomenon. Yeah. And I lived in I'm going to say I lived in a place in Sussex. Obviously, won't reveal the details to stop because it's private land.
Yeah.
But it was an incredible liminal place with quite an incredible history and past. So you can imagine why the various groups and people that lived there that seemed very much to know about liminality and that there was invisible forces and beings that you could contact. Yeah. And in those days, I was having a bit of a summer holiday, a bit of a staycation. And And we used to like escaping out into the South Downs with just an easel and some watercolours and doing painting. And it was been a particularly hot summer. And a friend of mine had said, "Oh, can I come with you? I'd like to do some sketching as well." I said, "Yeah, fine, no problem." So I remember we walked across this field in which the earth was very cracked. It looked like sort of the classical sort of cracked earth of an African drought kind of look.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the field was this copse that stretched up over a slow inclined hill. So we was headed towards that. So we got there, and we had obviously some packed lunch with us, something to drink, some sandwiches. So we decided to sit down on a fallen tree in this woods because it was shady, and just sort of watch the dappled light and have a chit chat about things, and was eating sandwiches. Then all of a sudden, my friend, if I remember right, was sort of looking into the trees, and I thought, what are they looking at? I looked, and there was like the odd sort of glimpse of some sort of bright colour, and then everything became extraordinarily silent. You couldn't hear the sound of any rustling of the leaves or any sound of birds. It was just this peculiar silence, and then realised the colours were coming from the clothes of two figures that we could see walking through the woods towards us. And the two figures were quite striking. The first one, the tallest one, was a young girl who had long dark red hair, and she had a long dress on. I can't quite remember the colour off the top of my head. It was sort of like a purpley colour, I think. And it seemed to be made of like a sort of a velvet. And the odd thing about her and her companion that was coming along with her was that the colours seemed very, very vivid. Not that they were necessarily bright colours, but they seemed to have like a deeper saturation. And I'm looking, and the companion with her seemed to be like a dwarf.
Wow.
And he had sort of really long hair and a long dark beard. He was dressed in sort of similar sort of clothes that seemed a bit nondescript, but again, the colour was very vivid. And they walked not too far away from us, walked past, and as they sort of went off down past the other trees, they then stopped, looked round at us, chuckled, and then just vanished in front of our eyes. And my friend said to me, "Did you see that?" I went, "Yes." And it was the interesting sort of aftermath of this was that we spoke about it for about 10, 15 minutes. And then it suddenly occurred to us, well, why don't we go up to where we last saw them and have a look? So which we did. Obviously, there wasn't anything we could see. There was no footprints or whatever. And then my friend then like shut it out of their mind as if it never happened. But I remember speaking about it years later. But yeah, that freaked me out so much. I shut it out of my mind. Not that they'd forgotten it, but they just didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So this theme, whether they were, again, they could have been fae. Yeah, there was an ethereal beauty about them. Obviously, they were human, but there was certain elements that you would have said a little bit more than human. This vividness with the colours, I've come across that before, and I've also come across some people that have had fairy encounters have mentioned this themselves, that they said they realised, thinking about it in hindsight, that the colours on the face seem just very intense. I don't know if you come across that.
I definitely have through healing, where I have, when I've had a very powerful healing experience that changed my vision, my eyesight. I had been short-sighted, and then I could see clearly again. When I open my eyes, and this happens when I have healings anyway now, but it was most notable the first time I experienced it. When I opened my eyes, everything was bright and vivid. It was like it's like the world comes alive. It's like you're seeing the real world, actually. Although somebody would argue, well, what you're seeing is a vision, with what you saw. Obviously, we see it in a different way. We would see it that we're looking at, beings from another world, or that we suddenly have stepped into their world in some way, or that we're able to, some kind of veil has come down in order for us to see each other. But what you're seeing is real, and it's more real than our everyday lived experience, which is placed upon, the way that we live. So yeah, when I see that, I feel like I'm in touch with, it's like a sense of connection to the real nature of this world.
Yes. I mean, I could say sort of two things really. Firstly, when your inner sight switches on, when you're, if you like, your third eye function, you're seeing the psychic colours in things. You're seeing with the psychic sight superimposed on the physical side. So you're seeing the two together with it. In some of the mystery schools, they used to say, regarded this as what they would call the lost fourth dimension, or in actual fact, they'd say it's the first dimension. It's the thing where things are really real. So you would see etheric as in terms of it was as real as the material world around you.
Yeah.
And you kind of sort of superimposed. Interesting, you said that you felt like you were connecting to like a oneness, a wholeness with things. When you do have that experience, you are perceiving a reality. Everything is connected with that.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you do meet beings, or sometimes you have this experience of this connection, that can often come in dreams, because the analytical part of your brain is more asleep, and the psychic side of your brain, the right side, is more switched on and awake. So one trying to cancel the other one out. So you often have encounters in what we call lucid dreams, where you are perceiving a reality but within a dream.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Is this something that you've been able to practice, lucid dreaming?
Yes, for a long time.
Before I ask you more about that, can I take you back to the experience with those beings in the wood?
Yes.
Well, first of all, did you get eye contact with those beings?
Yes.
What was that? What was that like?
Well, that was interesting, because there was, it's going to sound a twee thing to say, but there was this immediate sense of a connectedness to a greater reality that I could sort of vaguely sense, but I couldn't have given you an objective reason as to why, or objectively what I was really talking about. It was just, you felt like you were looking into another world.
And what were their facial expressions like, if you can remember? I know it's a long time ago.
No, that's all right. Well, when they were talking to each other, they were, as you would imagine, people to look like when they're having an animated conversation together. So their faces. Now you said it. That's a very good question, actually. Their faces were expressing emotion and reaction to each other's comments and words, as you would imagine if you sat watching people having a conversation together. It was when they stopped, turned around and looked, and that's when I really got a good look into their eyes. There was a sense of, oh my gosh, he can see us. And that's when the chuckle came out from them. And there was this sense of, well, we better go now. And it was almost like, we're going now. They were saying, bye, see you later, which proved to be interesting. And then they just went. There was also the sensation that my friend was getting very disturbed by this. And so there was a sense, it wasn't in words, but I could feel that their awareness was, okay, we better go, because that one's there's getting a bit scared.
So they're possibly responding to that. Do you remember what their voices sounded like, or whether you could even hear their voices to one another?
Could hear their voices. We were so, I was going to sound a really daft thing to say, but we were so amazed by the way the pair of them looked and how different they were. In one sense, you didn't expect to come across these sort of fey-like figures. We neither of us could remember what they were saying, but we could hear the cadence in their voice. And it was just as if it seemed quite warm and friendly. They sounded like the same sort of warmth and friendliness you would get when two old friends are talking together excitedly about something. If that makes sense. If that in any way answers the question.
Yeah, it does. It does. So, and at the time, and again, I know it's a long time ago, so it's tricky, but when you initially saw them,
Yes.
did you feel that anywhere in your body? Was there anywhere that it kind of came up for you or your friend in your body? I mean, it sounds like your friend had a slight, fear reaction of some sort. But for you, and possibly your friend as well, if you know, what kind of, did you have any physical reaction?
Yes, I did. I didn't have the common sense to ask my friend at the time, because now you've said it, I think that's a very good question. But I do remember there was this strong sense of like a connected energy over the heart and around the heart. And then there was also a rather strange sensation of like mild electric tingle running up the spine from the base to the top. That's the only thing I can remember.
Yeah, interesting. So going forward then, what happened afterwards? Did that come at a point in transition in your lives, or, what happened to your friendship afterwards as well? I'm quite interested about that too.
Well, I think we lost touch. My friend ended up going off and doing different things and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it at the time, but in hindsight, there was a little bit of a psychic awakening that went on,
Mm-hmm.
because it happened so naturally to me. I didn't realize it consciously at the time that this might have been connected to this event. I would then have very, very lucid dreams about being in old woods, ancient woods, far away in the west of England, believe it or not.
Right.
Yeah. So which used to be quite strange.
So maybe, well, I don't know. How did you make sense of that?
I found it fascinating. I found that drew me into reading up things on fairy lore. It drew me into reading up things. It just led to some interesting things about like the west of England and Ireland and all the old myths and legends and various things. Then out of the blue, somebody said to me, "Oh, we're going to Glastonbury Thursday. Do you want to come to Glastonbury?" And I didn't even know what Glastonbury was then. I went, "Yeah, all right." And just these little connections kept coming up to the west in this part of the world.
Yeah. Do you know if there's any folklore attached to that place that you were walking around where the copse is?
Yes, there's a lot.
Right.
It's not giving the location of this place away, but if you stand there, because this is public knowledge, this one, you can see Sisbury Ring,
Mm-hmm.
which is famous in Sussex for being like a portal, a hotspot. All kinds of people have had like ghostly and supernatural encounters there. And then the place that I've told you about, the location there that we're not mentioning at the moment because it's private land, there's a lot of folklore, both old and modern there. People having strange encounters.
Right. So people having strange encounters there. Right. I don't suppose.
From fairies to so-called UFOs, basically.
Right. Okay. So it's a bit of a hotspot then.
Yeah.
Or a window area, as they're sometimes called. Yeah. So do you feel like that was your sort of introduction to the sort of the Fey world then?
Yes. Funnily enough, I do. In hindsight, but yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. And then, so Glastonbury ended up being an important place for you too.
Yes. I didn't realise how important it's going to be, but it did end up being important. Yeah. And not just Glastonbury, but the whole area that I sort of vaguely call Avalon. This whole area, the whole southwest of England. Everything ranging from Avebury all the way through down to Dartmoor. I include all of it in it. It's quite an ancient place.
It is. It's so rich here, isn't it? It really is a beautiful place to live.
Yes.
So could you tell me about your amazing experience at Glastonbury Tor? Because that is fascinating. I mean, you and I, and I'm sure listeners have heard lots of encounters happening at Glastonbury. I mean, it's a real pokey place, isn't it? But what was it that you experienced there?
Right. Well, just to give you some backstory, obviously I'd been to Glastonbury lots and lots of times. I've climbed the Tor lots of times, and it's like, it's okay, it's the Tor, and it's interesting. There's lots of people up and down, but I've never had anything, sort of supernatural happen there as such. I'd met my first druid in Glastonbury while sitting on the eggstone, because I'd found that for the first time, but that's a whole nother story. But what had happened, it was Halloween. I was in Glastonbury waiting for my wife, who was doing something or other in the town. And I decided to take a walk up onto the Tor at dusk, just after dusk. So I only went up there because it did, funnily enough, seem quite empty. I couldn't see the outlines of any figures at all up on the Tor, and it seemed quite empty and quite peaceful. And I thought, well, I'll just take a little walk up the top, have a look round. It's Halloween, see what's going on, maybe get some photographs. So I started up towards the Tor. I'd probably gone about halfway up when I could hear the sound of laughter, people sort of giggling and laughing, and came round a corner, if you like, because I wasn't going like straight up to the Tor. I sort of veered off a little bit. I think I was sort of vaguely heading back towards the eggstone, and I realised there was three women there that seemed to be dressed very. To be honest with you, I thought they were just dressed up for the occasion. They seemed almost like sort of medieval dress, but very, at the same time, very, very ornate. As if I thought, oh, they're obviously dressing up for something to do with Halloween, and they were laughing and talking, and they were calling out to me and seemed to be quite friendly. And so I sort of stood a few feet away and sort of had polite conversation, because I was very old-fashioned enough to realise 3 ladies up on their own on the Tor. I didn't want to be like a man, intimidate them or frighten them, so I was keeping my distance, standing back, and they were just sort of seemed quite all right. Hello, how are you? And what are you doing? I said, I'm just going for a walk on the Tor. Are you ladies all right? And then they kept saying, oh, we've got some wine and some oatcakes. Would you like some? And I was like, some weird instinct. I said, no, that's all right. No, that's fine. I'm going to carry on, go up to the top of the Tor. I don't know why. Something just made me want to sort of stay slightly out of the way. And they smiled and sort of just laughed and sort of almost like turned their backs on me as if they were getting on with what they were doing. And as I stood and watched, they just suddenly vanished, gone, like that.
Yeah.
In the dusk, just went. And I was like, ooh, okay.
Did you say this was close to Samhain then?
It was Samhain.
Halloween.
Yeah.
Goodness me. But they seemed, again, very open and friendly.
Yes. Yeah. Not in an inappropriate way, but just open and friendly. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you sense from that experience then, physically in your body?
The same thing, really. The same thing, just this sort of slight electrical feeling up and down the spine.
Yeah.
And a slight sort of rushing feeling over the sort of the right side of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah. One of my friends said, that'll learn. You'll never take a hobnob from a fairy up the Tor. Like,
exactly. Okay. Did you make it to the top of the Tor?
I did. Yeah. And which I met a guy who was real. He was sitting up there. He decided he was actually inside the tower there, and he had a didgeridoo. And when I turned up, he decided to play a tune on his didgeridoo. But, yeah.
There's always someone up there, either with a didge or a flute or a drum.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's always some kind of shenanigans going on when you reach the top. It's a really fabulous place. I love it there. Yeah, so just lots of marvellous encounters you've had.
Oh, no, trust me, we'll be here for hours. What I'll have to do is I'll have to write a few little synopses down to ones and send them to you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You want me to tell you about the West Kennet Longbarrow one?
Oh, yes, please. This section is available for all members of the Curious Crew who support me on Patreon. Join us there for this and more bonus content. Patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. And you like me, you like working outside, in various places in nature. When you're working outside and you do get these beings kind of checking in and you feel their presence, particularly at night in the evening.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things I always found interesting about the ancient Celts and what we apparently know of the Druids was that sunset was regarded as the sunrise. Sunset was the start of a new day, because I'm thinking that the thing was that a new day began, actual fact, with the night and the stars. Because it was blue.
Yeah.
The same way that Samhain is the start of the new year, which starts with winter first.
With the darkness.
Yeah.
Well, this is it. We all start. I mean, look at the way that we're born. We go through the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly.
into the light.
Exactly. That's exactly what we do. Yeah. And go back to your original question as to do I think that these areas used as like a way station, either from beings from elsewhere, whether that we're actually talking about physical aliens and physical spaceships. I don't know. What it does suggest is that whoever these beings are, wherever they come from, are very much aware of what the Celts and the Druids called the Otherworld, or the astral realm, or the Akashic realm. That's the place where everything's connected, the place outside of time and space. And of course, the argument would be that if you're connected with that, you're magical enough to traverse that and work with that. Why would you actually need a physical spaceship? But you never know. You never know. Are these physical spaceships thought forms or tulpas? We don't know.
We just don't know. Or are they us in the future coming back?
Could well be.
The aspect of ourselves that, really got fired up with the whole digitalization, culture of digitalization. We don't know, do we?
Taking on that theme of time and that realm that is outside of time and space, I had a weird thought. It's probably not true. I'm not dogmatic about it. It's just a fun thought. But the last time I was standing in a crop circle, it suddenly occurred to me, supposing this was the Druids in the other world, that they've sort of tumbled forward in time, because they're very much aware of the cycles of time. Like, okay, the Romans might have been massacring them then, but supposing they all projected forward in time, and that's what crop circles were vaguely to do with, because they understood the cycles of time.
Yeah, that's a really nice idea.
I mean, it might go quite nicely with "it's us from the future." Well, maybe it's us from the past. We don't know.
Yeah, true. So how does your lucid dreaming tie into all this then? So how do you, when you're talking about accessing these realms, is that your preferred means of travel?
Yes. I mean, when you begin to start the process of, if you like, learning how to do this, one of the things that you will naturally encounter, and lots of people do, you'll begin to realize that when you're in a dream, it's going to sound strange, but if you've experienced it, you'll get it, because it's really difficult to describe, though it's quite a simple thing. When you're in a dream and you begin to wake up in a dream, like, oh, I'm asleep and dreaming, you realize that everything you're experiencing in that dream has the life and consciousness of just you in your dream world. And then sometimes the dreams become very vivid, and you'll meet people and thoughts and ideas in that. It's like, that's not from me, that's from outside somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then you go to the third level of it, in which your consciousness will actually literally come out of your body. You'll wake up in a dream, you'll wake up, you'll feel like you've woken up, and you're actually aware that your body has come straight out of your consciousness, has come straight out of your body, and you're standing in the room, you're looking at your body lying asleep on the bed, which to start with will freak you out. Then you go into the astral realm, then you find there's layers to the astral realm, and you begin to experience and learn, like, you've got an astral body, an astral brain, an astral mind, astral senses, and that all that's hidden inside your physical body for the length of this incarnation. So you learn how to work with that.
Did you first experience this, as a young child as well? Because I feel like many of us do kind of sense this from an early age.
Yeah. I mean, the first time it happened, I must have been again at like the same age as my mum with a fairy painting, about 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
I remember saying to my friends that live locally, "Oh, I came round to your house last night and you didn't want to come out to play. You stayed sleeping in your bed." And I thought everybody came out of their body and went round to see people. It's only when I was speaking to my mum that she explained that it was a thing called out of body or astral projection.
Yeah, so many children experience this,
Absolutely.
and I think a lot of people think, "Oh, well, I was dreaming back then," but there's kind of a sense of knowing, no, it wasn't.
Yes, that's right.
You knew then. And what would happen on those occasions? Do you remember how did that function for you at the time? Do you remember? Do you just remember the part of being in their bedrooms, or do you remember any aspect of it?
Sometimes I remember being in a dream and then thinking, "Oh, I'm dreaming," and then there was this sensation of waking up from the dream, and simultaneously with the waking up from the dream, there was this sensation like I moved up and out of my body.
Yeah.
And I'd look down and I thought, "Oh, I've still got a body," but of course it was the astral body. And then I'd turn around and look and I'd still see me asleep in the bed. But when you're like a very small child, you're more accepting of things. Because I didn't have anything to go that this might not be normal, I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't have the language to know what to call it, but it just seemed natural.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you get older and you try doing these experiments like psychic development and astral projection exercise when you're older and you suddenly realise you come out of your body, you freak out.
Oh, totally. I've spoken about the first time that happened to me. I was not expecting that. I was expecting I was meditating with an amethyst. Of course, that number one, I hadn't really kind of thought about the fact that it was an amethyst. I just grabbed crystal, and I have spoken about this before, but I was training in Reiki, and it was just after I'd read, do you remember the Celestine Prophecy, when everyone was reading the Celestine Prophecy? And a woman at work who'd lent me that book she was a Reiki master by that point. This was 1990 or 96, in fact, would have been 96. I was learning Reiki from her round at her house. So she says, "Come round, bring a crystal." So we sat on her couch, and as I say, I'd grabbed this amethyst and from before I left home, and you had to put the crystal in your left hand, and then you had to cup your right hand over the top, and then you would breathe in as if you were breathing the energy of that crystal, that breathing the kind of connecting with that crystal. You'd imagine the breath to go up your arms and into your heart. And then as you breathe out, you were breathing the experience of yourself back into that crystal. And you were just carry on doing this. And all of a sudden, my body disappeared. And I was in this place where it was infinite. It was light. There was no end to it at all, but also I was everything, but also I was nothing. I was not, I'd completely disappeared, but at the same time, I felt like I filled everything. It was like that. And I had never experienced that before, at least in my adult years. If I had experienced that, it was a long, long time ago. And I panicked. It freaked me out. I thought, well, where am I? And and I tried to, obviously the panic kind of brought me out of it, because I remember thinking, how do I get out? How do I get? It felt like, how do I get down, kind of thing. And she was a bit freaked out by the fact that I was freaked out, and she ran to get her partner who was in the kitchen, and he was a few steps ahead of her, sort of thing. So he was very sort of calming and said, "Right, okay, what were you doing? What were you using?" Of course, it was an amethyst, which amethyst is violet chakra and connects to the all.
As the druids would say, "Welcome to the other world."
Yeah, right. So when you...
I'm sorry you frightened you, but fabulous story.
Oh, yeah, no, it was wonderful. I mean, once I had come down, And I'd got over the shock. I wanted more basically, and I wanted to sort of lean into that and explore more of that, because this was something that I had experienced out of the blue. I knew how real it felt. It was so unlike anything that had been described to me before about our waking reality, and I wanted to know more. If you were going to advise people that are interested in lucid dreaming, what could you advise for people that are starting out on that path of exploration?
Firstly, obviously, watch your own psychology. If you're not used to this, one of the first things you'll encounter is your own sort of superstitious fear level. Yeah. So just be aware that you could feel like that. So, and if you're going to do lucid dreaming, do some sort of grounding and protection ritual around yourself to start with. Yeah. So you just know that you're not going to accidentally tune into random astral forces. Yeah. Various things you can look up and do. It's just basic grounding and making a safe space for yourself with it. Just whatever comes to your mind to do, you can do a bit of your own research, find things to do that make you feel better, make you feel safe. Also, pay attention to what you're thinking and feeling a few days before you try this. Try to just make sure that you don't only watch films or things that are in keeping with your highest ideals that bring out the best in you. Yeah, so you're not accidentally tuning into things of a lower astral nature. And then probably the first thing you need to do is, and it's quite simple, is a safe, slow process of beginning to waken up the psychic body and brain in yourself. You can't force it. There's a very simple way to do it. You find that in yoga, you find it various different traditions will have the same exercise. You just lie down, relax, and then you just spend a few moments starting maybe at your feet or the top of your head going the other way down. You just become aware of your toes, become aware of your feet, become aware of your ankles, and gradually come up your whole body like that. And then so you're becoming aware of your hips, and then your chest and your heart and your neck and your head and your eyes and your tongue. So you do that 2 or 3 times. And because you're not trying to force a concentration, you're not trying to force energy into anything. Where you put your mind, energy will follow naturally. So what you're actually doing by concentrating what's vaguely sort of called the overall exercise like this on your body, you're gradually waking up the psychic counterpart of yourself that's inside your physical body functioning all the time. And then you will find that the ability to have a lucid dream will happen far more naturally and frequently, if that makes sense.
Thank you. That's really great advice. Yeah, thank you very much.
Another time I'll have to tell you some of the stories about adventures into the other world and contacting other worlds and other dimensions.
I would love to hear that.
And it's interesting, not like I'm not being like going on about myself, but it's interesting. It came from a lot of serious work in a mystery school.
Yeah.
A lot of graded, meticulous work over many years, and it just suddenly started happening. And there was unexpected encounters with, if you like, realms above this one. Yeah. So suddenly you would find yourself in this other world with human beings, but it was just very different. So we'll have to chat about that sometime.
I would love to talk about that. Well, yeah, thanks very much for your time. I really enjoyed speaking to you, and please do come back on and share your other stories as well. I would love to hear those. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great fun. Thank you for sharing your stories with me. That's been really interesting.
Time to
Thanks so much to our guest for his enthralling stories. Every now and then I meet someone who has a series of these encounters, and really I think I've always probably known deep down that there are many dotted around the world with similar tales to tell. The first story about the fairy painting sounds both thrilling and terrifying to experience. We can understand why families keep these sorts of events quiet, and I'm sure that many of these stories are lost through the generations. The magic that it conjures is the same sense of knowingness about this universe that I used to feel as a child when I read stories of this nature. Could this really be true, that the world is not as it is presented to us? Shares like this seem to suggest so. For most people, a brush with the uncanny is enough for them to want to get as far away from it as possible, but then there are some of us who want to lean in. Our guest's description of walking through the wood contains many motifs relating to fairy encounters and episodes of general high strangeness. The sudden silence descending and the vivid colours of the fae folk. The humour also resonates with me as they giggle before they disappear. This seems to be an aspect of the fairy realm, a sense of mischief and amusement. Perhaps this way of being is a point at which our worlds are drawn together. Glastonbury has long been held as a sacred space, and over the years it has been the scene of many accounts of paranormal phenomena, including visions, encounters, and the arrival of anomalous lights. Festival of Samhain these days, more commonly related to Halloween, is the turn into the dark of the year, when the potential to move between the worlds seems more accessible. A liminal time in a liminal space. Again, the sense of amusement was present, and our guest had an intuitive recognition of the potential dangers for being drawn in. We are, of course, speaking to an individual who knows these worlds through experience over the years of working with magical practice and studying through the mystery schools. The idea of traditional mystery schools is that in ancient times, wisdom is said to have been shared through ritual and initiation in a series of sacred sites throughout the world, including ancient Egypt, South America, the British Isles, Vedic India, and ancient Greece, among others. In these places, individuals would take a journey of personal transformation through esoteric teachings, awakening them to their true spiritual path. They would study the mysteries of this universe and learn to recognize their true divine nature and the oneness of these worlds. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing these encounters, and I feel it gives us hope in these times that whatever we're presented with in the external, there is more to this world, and that our connection with the other worlds is ever greater, particularly in these times. It is as it always was, and it's up to us to once more connect with our true divine nature and knowingness. Do what is true for you, be who you truly are, and this way we meet the oneness of this universe. Thank you for joining us. Be well and stay open to the possibility of a new reality for yourself and for this world, and always remain curious.